Well, documents from the Department of Health and Human Services show thousands of migrant children were sexually abused while in U.S. government custody. The documents were released by Florida Congressman Ted Deutch Tuesday. They show the Office of Refugee Resettlement received more than 4,500 complaints. That's over the past 4 years. The allegations date back to 2015 during the Obama administration, but they spiked after the Trump administration implemented its zero-tolerance policy at the border. Deutch joins me now from Capitol Hill with more. So, Congressman Deutch, what exactly did the documents reveal about these allegations that were made to the Justice Department, and were they all against staff members?
Well, these are allegations that were uncovered in response to a request that we made in January to provide information to the Judiciary Committee. They provided these memos in the middle of thousands of pages of documents. They weren't well marked, and frankly, they were barely legible. But what they show is that over the course of a number of years, there were thousands of cases of alleged sexual misconduct, sexual assault, including over 3 years, over 150 cases of sexual assault by adults against minors. It's unclear whether these are HHS or Office of Refugee Resettlement employees or contractors, but the revelations are shocking, they're horrific, and we knew that they acknowledged this was a problem. They had a rule to address it that's now 5 years old. The real question, Rena, is this: when the president and the administration decided to start tearing kids away from their parents, did they know that they would be traumatizing them in that way only to put them at risk in these detention centers, at risk of sexual assault by adults?
I want to ask you more about that in just a second, but I want to take a step back for one moment. Sure. When you look at this big picture, why did the House Judiciary Committee initially request these documents in the first place?
Sure. Well, we requested all of the documents related to the zero-tolerance policy that caused the administration to take kids away from their parents. And this was an issue. The Obama administration issued a rule 5 years ago to detect and address sexual abuse in detention facilities. This was an issue. It was an issue that required action by the last administration, which they took. And so we wanted to know what information this administration had in connection with the zero-tolerance policy that would respond to what had already been well known was a potential problem.
So when these allegations were addressed, when they were first reported to the Office of Refugee Resettlement and the DOJ, did they address these accusations immediately?
Right. That's the question. We can't tell from these documents exactly what happened. There's great detail about the cases, what the allegations were, which in so many instances is shocking, and whether the employees were whether they continued to be employed, whether they were reassigned, whether they were terminated. We don't know what the process was that they went through. We don't know if they were reassigned, where they were sent. We don't know how many of these were sent to the Justice Department for prosecution. Those are all of the questions that we have coming out of these documents, and we're just starting to ask the questions. We clearly need to get to the bottom of this. We need to understand exactly what happened here. All during this hearing today, what we kept hearing from the administration was that their focus was on the care for these kids, and clearly they failed.
Yeah, but ultimately, by releasing these documents, Congressman Deutch, what do you really hope will come? What changes do you want to see?
Well, we want to understand, first we want to understand whether they considered these at the time they put this awful policy in place. But going forward, this kind of revelation, we hope, will focus attention on this terrible situation to ensure that behavior changes, that if there are facilities where they're not conducting background checks, that this could be the result. It's information like this that will hopefully cause a re-examination of the way things are done in order to prevent kids from being preyed upon. Kids who, in so many instances, travel thousands of miles to try to reach safety and a safe place. We want to make sure that those kids aren't in jeopardy of being sexually assaulted by the adults who are purportedly there to care for them.
You know, as you know very well on Capitol Hill, changing policy and getting correction to happen doesn't happen quickly. How do we ensure that over the next couple of days, weeks, months, that these children are not abused?
Right. Well, that's a great question. There's the work that we're going to do to continue to ask these questions of HHS and the Office of Refugee Resettlement. We're going to push the administration to give us answers. And my hope is that as people focus on this issue, it will increase the attention on these facilities and the oversight at these facilities to make sure that these kids are protected.
So when you talk about migrant family separations, how does what we know now, based on these documents being released, affect that situation going forward?
Well, all it does is reinforce what a terrible policy it was at the beginning. We knew that it was a terrible idea to institute a policy that was going to tear kids away from their parents. We knew the traumatic effect that it would have, that the administration should have known the traumatic effect that it was going to have on these kids. What this shows is that beyond the trauma created by this policy, this was a policy implemented at a time when the administration should have known the additional risk that they were putting these kids in, and the potential threats of sexual abuse from the people who were meant to take care of them. That's what we've learned, and they have to do better. We have to understand whether they knew this at the time, but at this point, we have to make sure we're doing everything we possibly can to make sure that that these assaults and this behavior stops completely.
Do you think this affects President Trump's zero tolerance policy at all?
Well, if the president thought it was a good idea to tear kids away from their parents, I don't know. I just don't know whether, knowing that as he did so, he was putting them at further risk in putting them in the care of some of these individuals. I can only hope that someone in the administration looks at what we learned today and stands up and says, you know what, this has to stop. The Obama administration, this was a problem during the Obama administration. There was a policy that was meant to address it. It continued to be a problem on into this administration. There can be no acceptance of this. This isn't a political issue. This is about taking care of kids. That's something that everyone ought to be able to come together on. We'll have to wait and see how the administration reacts.
It certainly is about taking care of kids. You actually addressed these documents during a House hearing Tuesday. I'm curious what the response was. How were you received?
Well, I think people were shocked to learn about what was in these documents. I was disappointed by the immediate response of one of my colleagues who questioned the importance of these allegations, tried to compare what was happening to these kids to what was happening in caravans. The fact is, as I said before, this isn't political, and anyone who was in the hearing today, anybody who looks at these descriptions of these allegations ought to find them repulsive, they ought to be horrified by them, and it ought to spur them to condemn what happened and to take action to make sure that it stops.
Congressman Ted Deutch of Florida, thank you very much, Congressman, for joining us.
Thanks. I appreciate it.